It would be so easy to provide proof of life for $1 million. They would get what they wanted. If it was a kidnapping, if it was, and I say with a big fat if it was a kidnapping for ransom, they can collect that ransom by just giving information about where to find the body.
Welcome to Buzzworthy Radio. Here's your host, NaVell Lee.
Matt Murphy is joining me. I've been a fan of your work ever since Crime Watch Daily, and one of the things that stood out to me was how direct you were. You never sugarcoated anything, and you always fought for the victims' families. So it's great and an honor to finally have you here.
Watching you work was a masterpiece. So having
thank you very much.
Yes, having you sit here and getting to talk about some of those cases as well as what's going on now, it's warming my true crime heart.
I love it. I love it. That's good. I can add to somebody's day. That's awesome.
Absolutely. So a little background on you before we even get into that. And even this, I have a lot of questions on. So let's get into it. You grew up in LA, you went to UCSB for college, and you worked as a district attorney for 26 years. You got promoted to the homicide unit in 2002, and you worked in something that I'm still learning about, which is the vertical unit system. And my understanding of it, from what I was able to research that on, is that when you get that call, even if it was 3 a.m, you are right there, first on the scene next to the detective before the body is moved. And when the yellow tape goes up, you're there from beginning all the way to the final deposition.
Yeah. So philosophically, most DA's offices, they use an assembly line process where it's like that beginning of Law and Order, right? Where the police investigate and then
the original Law and Order, guys, not SVU, the original one.
Yeah. The original, exactly. And that show is pretty darn good, I got to say, like being in that world. And that is the way it works most of the time. So the police investigate. They put a stack of reports on one DA's desk who reviews it for filing. Then it goes from that person to somebody else for the pretrial and the arraignment. And then it goes to somebody else for, to do the preliminary hearing. And then way down the line, it winds up getting assigned to the trial lawyer who goes in and actually tries it. So the vertical system, the philosophy on that was somebody way smarter than me and way back. I think they started doing it, at least in Orange County, they started doing it in the 80s. There's a couple of World War II vets, as legend has it. And they got together with a couple young whippersnapper Vietnam vets, if you can believe that. And they decided that what they do is they would create specialized units like sexual assault, gangs, and homicide. And they'd let prosecutors become specialists in those areas. And then they would, for the murders, they would assign us our own patch of the county. So the idea is you work with the same detectives over and over again. They learn to trust you, and everybody wins when that happens because the police will kind of follow your advice in investigating the case. And then the detective that you're there with that night at 3 a.m, oftentimes, will be sitting next to you several years later when the jury comes back after doing a whole trial, and they'll sit with you for the whole trial. So it's this team philosophy. And so, yeah, we would go to the crime scenes before the body was moved. We'd be in there with all the forensic scientists, and it was, professionally, it was really important to do that. But also for the true crime viewers of your show, it is every bit as fascinating. And it's a terrible word to use, but it's fun professionally. When you go there, it is amazing to watch those people work. Like you watch the professionals from the crime lab put these things together. It is just something else. And same thing with the detectives and seeing the people come out and work together. I mean, I sound like I'm doing like an ad for vertical unit prosecution, but it really is. It's a better mousetrap. It just works 1,000 times better. And then you have ownership of the case from the very beginning, and you decide as the prosecutor when there's enough evidence, who to flip on co-defendants, who to charge, what charges, and you own it and you carry it all the way through, and it just works. I think every DA's office in America should do it that way for the really serious cases. Maybe they will one day.
It really is fascinating because you don't really know what goes on behind the scenes and how they get from point A to point B. So that's what's so fascinating about it. And one of the things I heard you say, you were on another podcast and you talked about you have to have an open mind. How difficult was that for you to get into that frame of thinking? Because I know there were 2 cases I wanted to bring up that you did not. You already had it set in stone who the suspect was. You already made up your mind on how this went down, but you had to pretty much come in and say, I do have to look at it from a different standpoint.
Yeah, I mean,
It was the Daniel
yeah.
Wozniak case was the first one I'm going to bring up, by the way.
Yeah, so Wozniak's a great example of that, and you learn this over time. And here's one that I don't think I've ever shared publicly. For example, on that, we had a guy who it looked like a regular domestic violence murder. All right, so he had a background of domestic violence, like ex-wives and ex-girlfriends, and he was what we would call a choker. When he would get mad, he would choke his romantic love interest, right? Like that was his whole background. He'd been arrested for it before. He's that guy, right? So we get a 911 call, and he gets dispatched, and his fiance, who was beautiful, I'll never forget that. She was young and she was pretty, and they'd gotten in a big giant argument, and he had dialed 911, and the neighbors said they heard people yelling, and she had bruising on her neck from she'd been choked. She had what's known as petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, which is what happens when somebody is choked. And the initial findings from the coroner was she had bruising on her strap muscles on the inside, and it was asphyxia is what she died of. So,
Okay.
this guy's in custody, and a lot of times you have to make that filing decision pretty quickly initially. And so I charged him with murder. And, we arraign him, everything's going smoothly. And then we get the toxicology results back. And that takes a while for the lab to process. It's probably like 2 or 3 weeks later. And turns out they had gotten in a huge argument. He choked her and really severely choked her out, but he didn't kill her. And she was so despondent from the argument, she went up and took about 1 million sleeping pills. And so it was a suicide. So that was one where, and it was brutal because I had to tell the mother, because I'd already met with her. After every time I'd have a new case, once we filed charges, right after the arraignment, I would arrange to sit down with the family. And so they had somebody to like a human being to connect to. And I want them to meet my team, my paralegal, my investigator. So they knew that there were people that were working hard for their family and seeking justice for their loved one, as corny as that sounds. And so I'd already had this, I developed a relationship with the mother, in that 2 or 3 week period. So I had to break the news to her that we were dismissing the murder charge. And as soon as you get word of that, it's not like you think about it for a couple of days. You have to go directly to court ethically and immediately dismiss, which is what I had to do. And it was that's a tough one, but you learn over the course of time that you have to keep an open mind, because a lot of times, like patrol officers have a great saying, believe half of what you see and nothing of what you hear. So Daniel Wozniak that you just brought up is a really good example of that. So I go in to this, you have the murder scene. There's a young woman named Julie Kibuishi who's found, she's been shot in the head in this guy, Sam Hare's apartment. And they're both college students at a junior college, and he was on the GI Bill. And he was at a place called Camp Keating in Afghanistan in the Korangal province, which saw some of the heaviest combat of the entire Afghan war. There were medals of honor awarded, and he survived without a scratch, but he certainly had some lingering PTSD from that. Probably killed people in Afghanistan, saw friends killed in combat. Like, he was the real deal. And so he came back, and he was going to school, and he's on the lam now. We can't find him. And when there's this dead young woman in his apartment, and there's all this stuff. There's F you, all yours, written in marker on her torn sweatshirt. And I walked in, and it's like, okay, well, clearly this is some sort of lover's quarrel sort of thing. Like, there's some romantic thing. And there was a note like F you. And there's all this evidence showing that he'd had some sort of jealous crash out or something. And immediately his parents were saying they weren't even dating. This is not real. It's not real. But what do parents really know, right? So I walk in, and it's like, okay, well, clearly this guy killed her and he's on the lam. And to the credit of my detectives, they're like, nope, something's not right. And it just shows you, like, that grizzled street cop, that gumshoe detective kind of, those guys are real, and they're out there. And Costa Mesa had a bunch of them. Newport did too, so did Irvine, but Costa Mesa was really good at that. And I'm buying it hook, line, and sinker. And it turns out what actually happened is Daniel Wozniak had lured Sam Herr the guy whose apartment it was, our Afghan war hero, lured him to a theater on the Los Alamitos military base, murdered him, got his ATM card so that he could access his combat pay. And then in the middle of all that, he decided, as part of this really awful plan, that what he was going to do is he was going to lure a separate victim, Julie, uses Sam's cell phone to lure her so that and murder her. He murdered her in the apartment to make it look like Sam had done it, and everybody would be looking for Sam. And that was his big like subterfuge. That was the way that he was going to throw the detectives off track, and it threw the prosecutor, me, off track right away. But the detectives never bought it. And within a couple of days, they had him in the interview chair, and it was a masterful interview. And he eventually admitted to the whole plot, that he murdered Sam and then used the cell phone to lure Julie and murdered her. And it was one of a few situations where I was buying into it, and really good cops kept me on track.
When I first saw that case on Crime Watch Daily, there were a lot of expletives that I said, especially towards the end when everything was revealed. But as time went on, as this case kept getting covered on more shows, 48 Hours also did one on this. And you also reunited with Ice-T on stage at CrimeCon. And
I did.
This
Yep.
was brought up on stage, and how we talked about that. And when I watched the other shows, I saw aspects of this case that obviously one show did not cover. So there was more that I was seeing about it, and also from Daniel. And the reason why I was dropping those expletives is because this person, I don't even want to call him a man because he's absolutely detestable. He's sitting in that chair and he has this look on his face that he thinks that he could get away with everything that has happened. And I know that the death penalty was on the table. He thought he was going to be able to get out of the death penalty. He was smiling in that courtroom, smiling. And even before that, there was something that he was doing. I don't even know what it was. It was a reality show or something where he was talking about he's not this, he's a really good guy, and he likes to read or whatever it was. And he's just like smiling and laughing. And I'm going, this dude is so wicked. It's so wicked.
Yeah, there was a film crew. Yeah, there's a film crew that went to the jail, and they did. I think the show was called Lockup, and we had nothing to do with it. Had no idea they were even going, and they went in, and I don't know if they were going to interview another inmate or if they were just trying to find somebody to interview. But Wozniak was an actor, right? So he sees them, and it was like a moth to the flame, and without ever telling
this was now his wheelhouse. He was able to put on a show.
This was his moment, right? And he sees lights, camera, and it's like he's a cheeseball community theater actor who was too lazy ever to, I think, try out for commercials even. And so he ran over to the cameras pretty much, and I think they might have seen him in the chow line. I can't remember what the testimony was on that, but he went over and he sat down and did at least one interview. And you're exactly right. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't do this, and it's all a big misunderstanding. It had nothing to do. And he's just lying his ass off with a big smile on his face. Yeah. And and we saw death. Death is largely symbolic in the state of California now. But yeah, he didn't want to get a real job. And so he put together this plot to murder a bona fide war hero and then kill this poor innocent young woman. It was just awful. And it took us years to get that thing to finally go. And the jury, I think, ultimately looked at the case the same way you did. Like, it was just jaw-dropping how ruthless this guy was. And they at the end of the day, they came back, and that wound up being, interestingly, the shortest death penalty verdict in the history of Orange County, supposedly. And I never sat outside the other juries with a stopwatch or anything, but that's what some people who were in the know said. Like, I think within the homicide unit that had paid closer attention, people in the management, structure said it was the shortest. They came back in very like record time and voted death. So I doubt he'll ever be executed, but if they do execute him one day, the world will not be a worse place as a result, because, man, what the pain and suffering you put those families through was on another level.
To me, when the case started, I can understand a little bit where it would have lied on Sam, because 8 years prior to, I understand that he was arrested for capital murder. So a part
He
of me was
was, yeah.
also, and a part of me was wondering, I think this is probably why a lot of people would have already suspected him because of that charge.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I do appreciate the fact that, as you pointed out, the people who were working this case, the detectives, were going, no, I smell something off. And they continued to look into it because it really didn't make sense. And I also like the fact that the person who had the ATM card that got it from Daniel in the first place, he even just came out and said, it's not my card. I got it from him. So
Yeah.
I think if
Yep.
we didn't have that, we probably would not have been able to catch Daniel in a certain way in this
Yep.
case. So
Yep, you're right. And that was another level. It was a 16-year-old kid named Wesley Freilich. And so imagine the scene for the viewer. And somehow in Wozniak's, it's like I don't know, boss, he used to say some of these plots for money are 90% genius, 10% pure dipshittery. Okay, that was his term, not mine. Pure dipshittery, 90% genius, 10%
am I
pure
going to get sued
dipshittery.
for that? Because I want to use that going forward.
No, it's all yours. It's all yours. So he puts together this whole elaborate plot, and then he gives this 16-year-old our victim's ATM card because Wozniak. It's like, here's the genius part. He doesn't want his face on any of the ATMs withdrawing money. He wants somebody that. So he gets this 16-year-old kid to do it, but then the kid takes the card and orders a pizza with it. Okay. So we've got teams on all these different ATMs in the area. And we got, these are grizzled detectives and they're staking out, waiting for this guy to use it. Like you can imagine it. And this kid skateboards up to one and everybody's looking for him. And then he buys a pizza with it. So he goes, he's with a couple of his little skater buddies. And there was a police helicopter. I think the FBI was involved in that raid. My memory is failing me a little bit, but it was SWAT teams, and I don't think anybody repelled in. But imagine coming in from every angle, SWAT guys with machine guns, and there's this 16-year-old with like a piece of pizza in his mouth. So what did I do? And that's how that. And he immediately said, I got this card from Daniel Wozniak, which of course was completely contradict everything Wozniak had told us. And that was as the case began to unravel. Yeah, that was a hell of a case. One of the things that true crime, like I do work with ABC, and 2020 I think does a great job of this, but so does Dateline, and so does 48 Hours of trying to present it from the victim's point of view.
Absolutely.
And I think the high quality true crime really does do that. There's some pretty low quality stuff out there that is bad about that, but that's one of the real things that can't ever be overstated is what these families go through when, because losing a loved one is the worst thing any of us can ever experience in our lives. But losing a loved one to murder, especially diabolical murder.
I was getting ready to say exactly that word. The way that this was done diabolically, I watched the parents of Sam. I watched Julie's mother. And they gave their victim impact statements. And I just felt every ounce of not just sadness, but I just felt for them because of what this man did to them. I mean, you dismembered this war hero. You dismembered him.
Yeah.
And then in the same spot, you went ahead and did a show hours later, that same day.
Yes. Yeah, and for your viewers, he murdered Sam and then acted in a play and then went and murdered Julie after the play and then went and acted in another play. It was the same play, like different showings. It was I'll never forget, it was the musical 9 and he nailed it. And we had videos of the performances and then they had a casting party after the second one. So right after murdering 2 people, he goes to this, I don't know if it was a rap party. I don't know if it was the last performance. It
was the rap party. Yeah.
It was the rap party, right? So they all go and there's all these pictures of Wozniak smiling and laughing. And I mean, just that some people just have that psychopathic ability to just completely separate themselves from the real apoplectic human grief that they've caused. And, Julie's mother in particular, that's one of those that will always break my heart, because she was completely innocent, doing everything right, and she wanted to be She wanted to be a fashion designer, and she had a family who loved her. And, that's the part that, again, can't be overstated. The grief that these poor people go through when a loved one is taken from them. And I'll tell you another thing. I had Newport, Costa Mesa, Laguna, and Irvine were my cities. But I was one of the cold case deputies, so I got to do cold cases from around the county. And that grief, if there's a cross-cultural human universal from the very poor to the very rich, whether somebody is immigrated from someplace else and they lost their loved one to a gang shootout, all the way up to, wealthy inventors, that, are living on oceanside homes that get murdered. It's the same thing for the loved ones. It's a human universal. When somebody that you love truly has been murdered, especially for money, or in the case of serial killers, for rape, it's just the worst thing. It's the worst thing anybody can go through. So we always try to do our best to sort of hold their hand and try to guide them through the process with as much dignity as we could.
This next case, segueing from that last statement to this one, I don't even know how you were able to console this family, but it was the case with the boat and Skylar De Leon. If you want to talk about me actually crying, that was probably the case that had me in tears. They were selling the boat, and they were selling it, unfortunately, to this person who also was a complete and utter mastermind in having this done. Not once, but apparently twice, because apparently he did something, I think, 10 years prior to that.
10 months.
And
10 months. Yeah.
10 months. 10 months. Yep. Excuse me.
Yep.
Math was not mathing on that statement. But 10 months prior to that. But the fact that that was done in such a way where they were tied up together, they hoisted the anchor over the boat, and they both went over at the same time. But it was also where the husband was saying to his wife, "We are at least going to be together." That broke my heart. That broke my absolute heart. And what he did that for, also, I'm not someone that would like to punch somebody in the face, but I would have probably punched him in the face. I don't even know how you were able to console the family after that, especially from my understanding of it, those bodies were not even found.
Yeah, we never recovered those bodies. And they were just for your viewers, it was Tom and Jackie Hawks, and they're just trying to save a few bucks. They were selling, Tom was a probation officer in Arizona and retired, and they wanted to cruise on a boat. They lived this kind of expat lifestyle for a couple of years in the Sea of Cortez. They cruise around. There's all these like retirees on their sailboats and their yachts. They go to different places and they listen to Jimmy Buffett and they go fishing. Mm-hmm. And it's this lifestyle that they live. And Jackie couldn't have babies of her own, so she was really excited because she married Tom, and he had two sons, Matt and Ryan, who are great guys. And Ryan wound up having a son. So Jackie had her first grandbaby and really wanted to help raise the kid. So she convinced Tom, as much as he loved his boat, to sell the boat, and they were going to move back to Arizona. So they put their boat up for sale, but this was like his life savings was poured into it. And when you sell a house, the agent gets about, what is it, like 5%, I think. If you sell a boat, the going rate is 15% for a yacht dealer. So wow. This is his life savings. So what he did is, right, nobody knows that. So he decided to do it himself, and he just put an ad in Yacht World magazine, figuring he could learn how to fill out the paperwork, and he wanted to save that. If you're selling a dinghy, it's one thing, but 15% of $500,000 is a substantial amount of money for a retiree. So he just tried to do it himself. A guy named Skylar De Leon answered the ad, pretended to be a wealthy, child actor, and went down there. And long story short, with a group of Confederates, took them out to sea to do a sea trial, which is basically a test drive, and tied them to an anchor, begging for their lives, and threw them overboard. And it was among the most ruthless murders ever. And so they disappeared. Then Skylar came back, fat, dumb, and happy with the yacht. And when the Hawks family began looking for them, and I'll tell you, it's a fascinating interview if you ever get to watch it, because he came in, he was, in 26 years as a prosecutor, he was the best liar I ever saw. And the story between him and his wife to the police was like, hey, look, yeah, we purchased the boat. And look, they promised to give us a little training on how to operate it. and we haven't heard from them. We would hate to have to sue them. So when you find them, can you please tell them that we still need to know how to transfer the fuel? Like, it was so convincing, and
Wow.
and it was weeks and weeks where they told identical stories. This guy Alonzo McChain, who was with Skylar, told an identical story. All of the documents they showed up with they provided to the police the sales documents, the title transfer for the boat. The Hawks' fingerprints were on them. Their DNA was on there, and they're like it, and it was their actual signatures. And we sent them back to the FBI, and they confirmed that they signed those documents. And everybody told basically the same story with just a couple of tiny little details that they got wrong. And they were notarized documents, by the way. There was a notary public named Kathleen Harris that we tracked down and interviewed. I think we interviewed her 4 or 5 times before she finally came clean, after the case began to sort of fall apart on them.
I saw that one.
And yeah, but it took us weeks and weeks. And, funny, interesting story on that one. And this wasn't a part of the public record, but a friend of mine who I'd done a bunch of cases with is Mark Garagos, right? He's a pretty famous criminal defense lawyer. And he was walking into the parking lot one day when I was going to court, and it was probably like maybe 10 days or so after the Hawks went missing. And he had just finished the whole Lacey Peterson, Scott Peterson case. And we'd known each other for years. I always liked Mark, and he stops me and he goes, "Hey, on that case, are they going to do side scan sonar?" And nobody in the world knew. That very day, we had the Navy out doing side scan sonar for the last GPS coordinates of the boat. And it was like, as a matter of fact, we are. And without skipping a beat, Mark Aragos told me, "You're not going to find the bodies." And I'll never forget it. He said, and you know what? Don't let that stop you. And it was like kind of a pep talk from a famous criminal defense lawyer. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. And we never did find the bodies, and we didn't let it stop us. And we got a clean sweep and convicted everybody on that case. And to go back, when we finally got enough evidence to do a search warrant, and it was, we hit the jackpot when we got into their house. We found the Hawks computer, and we found all these the Hawks, camcorder and all this personal property. But we also found a business card for an LAPD Interpol liaison officer. And when my detectives reached out to him, they're like, "Why is your business card in our suspects, stuff?" He said, "Oh, I was helping the Mexican police from Ensenada investigate a totally separate murder of this guy, John Peter Jarvie, from 10 months ago." Turns out Skylar also lured Jarvie down to Mexico, where he cut his throat on the side of the road between Ensenada and Tecate. And we charged him with that murder as well. So he did three murders that we know of. And yeah, he also, just on our California dime. And you're based in California, if I remember?
I'm actually in Jersey.
Okay, you're in Jersey. All right. Well, so congratulations. You didn't have to pay for this, but California now pays for sexual reassignment surgery. And Skylar said,
That
"I want
was where I was
surgery."
going to go with that, because I was about to bring that up, because I was going, I'm not in California, but I knew about the fact that we would have had to pay for the gender reassignment surgery, because when I heard about it, I was absolutely complete shock. I was complete shock. I had no idea.
I don't want to offend anybody here. And look, man, I've always looked at these cases. They transcend politics. For me, nobody has a monopoly on justice. No political party.
That's not what bothers me. I would have had no issue if you wanted to have gender reassignment surgery because that's what you feel. That's what you feel. My issue was you're having gender reassignment surgery after you basically did this, not once but twice. Right. And I believe the money that you wanted from these murders, well, one in particular anyway, but the Hawks, is what you wanted to use it for. That's my problem. That's my issue, right? Yeah,
that was his. That was his claim later. The thing about Skylar is he was such a good liar. I don't believe anything that he says. And he had in the Jarvie case, he had $50,000 in cash, and he didn't spend a penny on and gender reassignment back then. He could have done that with the cash that he had, and he bought a $900 sex machine. He bought a new car for his wife. They just blew it in about literally they spent all that money in about 48 hours, and it was all on frivolous nonsense. So
I
he's
do remember that.
always claimed that. But and look, I have no problem with somebody that wants to be happy to get transgender surgery. I support that. I got no problem with that at all. But California is famously broke all the time. It's only getting worse. And the idea that, I think it was I think the current price for gender reassignment surgery, actual like operating theater time and medical personnel, it's somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000. And the
Wow.
idea that and this is a condemned prisoner. This is the state of California, and he was sentenced to death. So he's on death row. Now, again, just like Wozniak, he's never going to get executed. But legally,
Right.
he is a condemned prisoner. And the state of California, the same state that theoretically is going to execute him, dropped, like, isn't there some kid that needs some sort of transplant that we can spend that $80,000 better on than making
Right.
a triple murderer more comfortable because he says he wants to transition? Like, that to me is insane. It is insane, and that is not a hack against the transgender community or anybody that wants to do that at all. In fact, I would imagine that I got a friend of mine that transitioned, who was wonderful, wonderful as a man, wonderful as a woman, who's a professional colleague. I always respected and really liked, as did everybody else in the Orange County legal community. I'll leave the name out, but everybody supported this person 100%. And we were assigned together for
Mhm.
about 11 months on my felony panel rotation. And like, we all supported this person. And I guarantee that person would run from any affiliation with Skylar De Leon, because that is actually a very
Yeah.
nice human being who has ethics and everything else, and it's like, so it's not a transgender thing. It's a manipulation con job by the most accomplished liar I've ever seen. And that money, in my view, is far better spent on, some innocent person that can use those funds for, medicine or a transplant or something. That's I don't think I'm alone in that, but I feel pretty
I know. I
strongly when it comes to
100% agree with
Skylar
that
De
statement.
Leon.
100%
Yeah.
agree. And you already brought up Mark Garagos, and you guys, within the last several months, you started your own podcast called In the Well. What's that like, doing that together, since at one point you were on opposing sides? Now you guys are teaming up and working together.
Yeah, so Mark, we did some cases back in the day, and there's different. They're almost like subspecies of defense lawyer that you deal with as a prosecutor. You've got your sort of classic old like hippie, like my buddy Dave used to call them unicorn riding hippies, and they're great. They're great to deal with. They have big giant hearts, and they're trying to help people. You know what I mean? And they just kind of help this. A lot of times it's the scum of the earth that they're helping, but that's their motivation. Then you've got some real professionals, especially younger, like public defenders that are in the public defender's office to get trial experience. And a lot of them are great too. And they'll leave and go into private practice. And, there's a few of them on my short list for the day I get in trouble, that are also great. Then you got, like, especially in the modern era, you've got your political ideologues, you know what I mean, who hate the cops, hate the prosecutors,
Yep.
everybody's lying, like the conspiracy theorist type. I hate dealing with them. Fortunately, over the course of my career, they're a minority. But and then you got your old school, kind of slick defense lawyers that come in that are charming as hell, and they remind me of those old Bugs Bunny Roadrunner cartoons,
Yeah.
with the sheepdog and the coyote, and it's like, "Good morning, Ralph. Good morning, Phil." Those guys. Mark's one of those. Like, Mark's one of those that he fights really hard for his clients, and you go head to head against him in front of a judge or a jury or whatever, and then you walk out into the hallway and he's like, "Hey man, have a great weekend." Mark's one of those guys, and it's a dying breed of criminal defense lawyers. I always appreciated them. Even when I was younger, I liked them, but the
Mhm.
older you get in the criminal law game, the more you come to really like those guys. So I always had and Mark's also just a great lawyer. So I always had a very healthy respect for him professionally, but I also just really liked the guy. And then years later, they put us together for this podcast, and of course, we both jumped on the opportunity, and it has been an absolute blast. And another funny thing about that is, I'm doing some defense work now, although I'm being very selective about it. But I think they thought that Mark and I might be like gosh, what was one of those old shows like Hannity and Combs, like Sean Hannity and I forgot the guy's first name, Combs, but they were, everything was like the opposite. Like on The View, they've got the one sort of token conservative on there who always gets shouted down by the other ones, and it's ABC. And I've been on that show too, and I've known Sunny Hostin for years. And I've always gotten along with her great. I know she gets lots of heat, but I've always really liked her. But I think they thought it was going to be that way with Mark and I. And the problem is that when it's not one of our own cases, the problem for that idea is Mark and I agree, believe it or not, on almost everything. Like if a couple of rational guys with a lot of experience in criminal law, when we don't have a dog in the fight, when we're just commenting about another case, we have yet to have a real disagreement on anything. Which is interesting, and I call it as I see it, and as long as Mark's not involved, he calls it as he sees it, and we tend to align. We had an episode on Megyn Kelly brought us in, and we were talking about the this Tyler Robinson preliminary hearing that we all just watched. And I think Megyn Kelly, and she's been, by the way, she's been great to me. She has been super nice to both of us, and helped facilitate our podcast. And so she's been really, really nice. I don't agree with her on everything. I agree with her on some stuff, and she's always been pretty gracious about disagreement. But she says, I cannot stand this judge, and kind of threw it to me. I think maybe she would have been thinking I was going to agree and pile on the judge that's doing it. And I'm like, I got to push back a little bit on that. I think he's being very meticulous, because his goal is is to have the case finalized at the end. And if that means, and in Utah, it might actually mean death because they're seeking it. Tyler Robinson might actually face execution one day, and the judge is trying to be super careful. So I pushed back on that. And it was funny because they had Mark on mute, and he looked like a little man in a box as he's like trying to come through, and he's talking and nobody can hear him. And she went to me first, and then she went to Mark, and he, we saw it the same way. Mark's like, no, this judge is doing a good job, and he's doing it to help the family so they never have to go through it again, so the case doesn't get reversed on appeal, which is one of the aspects of capital case litigation. It's all about the appellate scrutiny that the case is going to receive, and it's all about trying to ensure that wherever it goes, whatever happens, that it only has to be done once for the benefit of the defendant, and also for the benefit of the victim's family and the entire process. And we saw it the same way, and we both pushed back against Megyn Kelly. I hope she's not mad at me for it, but we did. We took an opposing position, and he backed me completely.
I want you to give it to us straight about two of these cases that are going on right now that I wanted to ask about, one of which is Nancy Guthrie. It's been several months now. We really haven't heard anything, because I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about this case. But I feel that, in no uncertain terms, I feel like it was botched from the beginning. The ransom note itself, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you said that when that came out, you called it bullshit at one point.
Yep.
What are your feelings on this case? And do you think, I'm sorry to say it, and I really hate saying this,
based on everything that I've followed and observed, I've come to the conclusion that I don't believe that Nancy's with us anymore.
It's just, I feel like there were so many missteps, and I just don't understand what's happening. What should we be looking at? What should we be paying attention to? But it's just, I don't know what to think. I don't know how to feel. It's just that I just feel for Savannah wholeheartedly of what's going on right now. And I just feel I feel like nobody's talking about it anymore. Nobody's giving it any more attention. We were hearing about it every day, which I felt like we should have. And now all of a sudden it just went completely under the radar. And I just want to know what's going on.
Yeah. So your instincts, I think, are exactly right. Okay. So there were a bunch of opportunities that were missed at the very beginning. Look, leadership really matters when you're talking about investigations like this. And I mean, leadership from law enforcement. Chris Nanos is the sheriff, and he's sort of received a lot of the spotlight and a lot of the criticism on this, every bit of which I believe is well deserved. But there's another part that's failed, and that is, going back to the vertical prosecution. In my murder cases, there was a prosecutor who was at the scene every step of the way to assist with warrants and to make sure, and everybody wins with that, to make sure the constitutional rights of the criminal suspect are protected, both for fairness' sake, which is a prosecutor's job, but also to make sure that that there's somebody there viewing it through the lens of what's going to happen in a courtroom. Because it's one thing to catch somebody. It's like Law and Order, right? It's a whole different thing to make sure that the person is held accountable for what they did. And for that, you need, especially in a case like this, you need the presence of prosecutors. An assigned prosecutor should be with them at the very beginning. The chief law enforcement officer of Pima County is a woman named Laura Conover, who was a career criminal defense lawyer. She never prosecuted a murder. She never worked with an FBI task force ever. She's never personally tried a homicide. She has no idea what she's doing. And I want to be fair, but I've been on the hot seat. I've been more than once. I've been on that stage with the cameras, and you are right. In my view, this is my opinion. The Guthrie family has been absolutely let down by the law enforcement leadership, including Laura Conover, who's not got enough criticism in my view, and Chris Nanos, who it was a clown show. And when he's butting heads with the FBI, and of course, not my case, so I wasn't there. This is based on what I've read and what I've seen, based on no inside knowledge. That like when the FBI rolls in and offers their resources, you say thank you. And I've worked multiple FBI task forces on missing children, on escaped people from the jail. The FBI at that level is wonderful, and they can do things that you can't do in state court, like in California, we have a thing called CalECPA. In order to get phone records, for example, you need a search warrant to do that. The FBI, they can do what's called an administrative drop warrant, where they can just get stuff from phone companies. Like it's like having magic at your fingertips as a prosecutor on a case like that. And they rolled in with agents, but there was a significant delay before the FBI was contacted. And Nanos insisted on using a lab in Florida, which is apparently a very good lab, but Quantico, Virginia literally wrote the book on a lot of these protocols, and they can turn DNA tests over inside of 12 hours. And I know that because I've seen it. They can do wonderful things. They have unlimited resources. And for a case like this, you need somebody to chase down, like when we got that incredible video, right? And the FBI obtained that we see the guy on the porch. You need somebody to track down the clothing and where, what stores they sell that version of jacket. Like, the FBI is the best organization in the world to do that. Why is the elected sheriff butting heads with them? That makes no sense to me. I believe that tragically she was dead inside the house. I don't think she survived that, given the blood that we saw outside. Again, that's my guess. I haven't seen any of the stuff on the inside of the home. I think that any time that there was over $1 million reward offer on this that could be collected anonymously, and they were willing to pay in cash. Okay, with that being our starting point. Anybody who reaches out, especially the TMZ, and says, for 1 Bitcoin, I'll give you information, every one of those is bullshit. Who would? I think Bitcoins are going somewhere between $7,000 or $80,000, like same as our gender reassignment surgery. Anybody who would reach out for that, asking for a Bitcoin when they can get $1 million in cash anonymously, is a bullshit thing. We have so many scams. I don't know how many of those you get a day. I probably get 20 a day. Your loan has been approved. All of those are scams. Unless you have recently applied for a loan, those are all scams, and it's ubiquitous. It happens all the time. And then we already had one guy from California that got caught, and for my money, his sentence was way too light. Who attempted to extort money from the family, pretending to be one of these fake scammer, or pretending to be somebody that had information on the kidnapper, or whatever. And yeah, they crawled out of the woodwork. I believe all of those are bullshit. Now, I don't know what the FBI knows. I'm not on the task force. I'm not sitting in those meetings, but it would be so easy to provide proof of life for $1 million. They would get what they wanted. If it was a kidnapping, and I say with a big fat if it was a kidnapping for ransom, they can collect that ransom by just giving information about where to find the body. And so but they would need proof of life. And the idea that none of those letters contained proof of life or proof of death, even something unique that they would know if they actually had her, means they're all bullshit. None of those are real. And I'm still, I have not been convinced, based on what has been released publicly, that this isn't a sex offender. That it could be that. I mean, and it could be any number of things. But again, keeping an open mind thing that I learned as a prosecutor, like, believe almost nothing of what you see, and and none of what you hear. And it really applies to that. Like, we can't know what it is until we know what it is, which is another problem I have with Chris Nanos going out and saying this person's been eliminated or that person's been eliminated. And I don't want to cast any shade on anybody that people have speculated about. But you can't do any of that as a sheriff until you know who did it, what their motivation was, if that makes sense.
It does. You said it. We got to know what the motive is before we can cancel somebody out. How can you sit there and cancel somebody out if you don't have the facts in front of you? And that's
right.
And to me, it's still weighing heavy. My mom always still asks about it. And I'm just sitting here going like, I wish I had the answers. I don't have the answers. I don't hear anybody else talking about it. And that's really what's upsetting about it. We don't know what's going on because it's not getting presented to us. So we have no idea what's happening. And then the other one that I wanted to bring up, I have not talked about this yet on the show, is the Nolan Wells case that's going on in Mississippi right now. And there's a lot of questions that are coming out from that. And that's mainly because everything that's coming out, it's either bullshit or it's nothing. And I'm just sitting here going, what exactly happened out there on that boat? I definitely do not see this kid staying behind. And it's not being treated as a homicide. Let's get that out of the way, everybody. It is not being treated as a homicide right now. But I do, in my opinion, expect that there was foul play involved. Because why would you delete the messages off of phones if there wasn't anything to hide? But the other thing, too, that I don't think many of them thought about is that you could delete messages, but those can be traced. And you can get those messages if there is a subpoena for them. There's no way that you can delete them anywhere out of the ecosystem. Those messages can come back. So I think it's interesting to me how, when we're talking about that case, having that open mind, unfortunately, we are going to the fact that everybody said that this is a race issue and this is a race case. I don't want to go to that point in this part of the investigation right now until I know what the facts are. But I'm also not going to sit here and also say, I don't understand where you're coming from, because I do. Because he was the only black kid on that boat with white friends on there, or white friends in quotation marks, as we can say. But you don't want to jump to that conclusion until you know for sure this is exactly where we need to be going with this. But it's also Mississippi. It is South. So it's another thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what your thoughts were on that as well, from your observation when you looked at it from the outside in.
So yeah, there's a lot of information that we don't know in that case, right? It's an ongoing investigation, right? And and as such, there's information that the public doesn't know yet, and the public shouldn't know. What I can tell you, and granted, this is Southern California, not Mississippi, but what I can tell you is, when you're when you're involved in a homicide investigation, every single department I worked with, they are as colorblind as you can possibly imagine. The detectives I got to work with, first of all, of every race, pretty much, at least, like, there are detectives that represent virtually every race in my patch of Orange County. But when it comes to victims and you're a assigned detective, they really, it's like that mother that you sit down with. None of the cops I ever worked with would care if that mother's Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and you see that on rotation in Southern California. Those four groups in particular, especially in Orange County, which has such a large Vietnamese population, and Julie, for example, her family is Japanese, but you see this over and over again. And when you sit down with that mother, as the detectives do, that is a cross-cultural, universal, apoplectic, someone's beautiful young kid is dead. And in my experience, detectives do not care about the race of the person, because that's your victim. And similarly, I've seen detectives, believe it or not, and people think I'm blowing smoke here, but I had a case with a homeless guy once who was actually from not Mississippi, it was Alabama, but his brothers came in. He was a homeless guy, and he was murdered by a real piece of work named Mr. Novak. It's one of my first murder cases. And his brothers came out, and they were these Southern gentlemen. One of them had a cane that I'll never forget, and they dressed in suits every day. They loved their brother, even though he was homeless. So in this case, what I want to believe, okay, based on my experience, I want to believe that we have really dedicated detectives who don't give a crap about any of the race stuff, that want to get to the bottom of what actually happened. Because he's by all accounts a nice young man who wound up losing his life under mysterious circumstances. And
correct,
I want to believe until I hear different, I want to hold to that based on my experience, that there's a couple of really dedicated cops who are turning over every rock on that, trying to figure it out. And you're right on the cell phone things. We can learn a ton of information regarding cell phones and emails, and everything, as long as it's not on like Snapchat that automatically deletes or is so heavily encrypted. They should be able to get all the electronic devices of every kid on that boat and see what the relationships were, and see if there was some sort of problem or some beef. And then same thing, they should be able to hopefully get into all communications after the boat came back and figure out if this was some drunken accident, which I really hope it was, or if there really was foul play. And if so, hopefully it will come clean or come clear based on that electronic data. So that's one of those that I think it's very, very important societally, especially right now. And I just, I hope I'm not naive here. I just hope the cops that are investigating are like the cops that I work with, who by the way include Black detectives, white detectives, Hispanic detectives, Asian detectives, and universally some of the best human beings I've ever met, because they wouldn't let go. That's what I'm hoping. Those are my thoughts on that one. I just don't know enough yet, based on the information that's publicly available at this point, to weigh in. And again, I want to keep an open mind until I hear as much as possible about it. Like that the Charlie Kirk thing has been really interesting for me, because they presented so much evidence at the preliminary hearing. Man, I feel like I could walk into court and prosecute that thing tomorrow. But like the Lynette Hooker case, the woman that disappeared off her yacht, that's another one. I have my theories. That guy had a whole history of domestic violence. I think if I was a prosecutor, I would be looking at Brian Hooker all day long. I would be trying to figure out an angle to charge that. But there's so much I don't know about GPS coordinates, about her Apple Watch, and I'm trying to reserve a strong opinion. And Ashley Banfield has had me on her show a couple of times to talk about that case. And it's like, she's got theories, she's got thoughts. I'm trying to keep that open mind until more evidence comes public, if that makes sense. Same thing on that horrible case out of Mississippi. And my heart breaks for that family. And not only that, and this is just me shooting from the hip, he just looks like such a nice kid in those photos that we all saw, right? He just looks like a nice guy. So I hope it was just an accident and there wasn't foul play. And if there was foul play, man, I hope they figure it out. And then, I'd be the first person to volunteer to prosecute the hell out of anybody who's involved. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that one.
You're right. Not a lot has come out, especially with a lot of the stories changing from the kids that were there. We don't know what's true, what's not. So we will definitely keep an eye on that story. Hopefully we hear more about Savannah Guthrie's mom of Nancy. And when that happens on both accounts, if not on one account, we would love to have you back here to talk about it.
I'd love to come back. Have me back anytime. We can talk about case of the day. We can talk about Tyler Robinson some more, or whatever you want. Between ABC
we also got to
and
talk about when, even that, you have a second book that you're working on. I think last month you sent something into them. So
yep.
Did you figure out a title?
Yeah. So what do you think about this? I'll get your input. So we kicked around different titles. And for your viewers, they can find me, they can DM me their thoughts on it. But we were looking at, I threw out, it's a book about serial killers for the viewer. And I prosecuted 14 serial killers as a DA. So that it's basically me getting into my thoughts on serial killers and some of the psychology, and as well as like walking through some of the behind the scenes courtroom strategy. I hope people like it. But right now, the latest title, we were looking at Evil and Empathy, because empathy, the lack of empathy that's the hallmark of psychopaths and serial killers. Yes. And some people like that one. So right now, but there's a lot of people that didn't. So right now we're looking at, my whole angle on it is the sexual assault angle, which is so common in serial killers, and some of the history of that. And I spent 4 years in the sexual assault unit before I went to homicide. So right now it's Sex and Psychopaths Prosecuting America's Worst Serial Killers. So that's the current working title.
Not for nothing, I like the latter.
Okay, you like Sex and Psychopaths better than Evil and Empathy. Okay, all right, good to know. Yeah, that's we're honing into it. So I that's probably my favorite of the working titles. We've had about a half dozen so far. So yeah, so that's the latest. And thank you for bringing it up. It's going to be available in about 9 months. The publishing world is very slow, but manuscript's in. We're going to hopefully get a second crack at polishing some of the edges, and then it'll go to the copy editor. And I can't wait to do the Audible on that one. My first book is called The Book of Murder.
Yes, it is. Viewer. Yes, it is. I'm looking forward to it, man. And when that happens, doors always open. Obviously, cases of the day, love to talk to you about that. But once that book hits the shelves, the floor is yours, man. Always.
I love it.
Always.
I love it. Yeah. But have me back anytime, man. I would love to talk about case of the day or anything new that comes up. Yeah, really enjoyed this. So again, you know how to reach me. So happy to come back anytime.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to The Buzz. Catch all episodes on Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe. Visit buzzworthyradiocast.com.